Well, now we're going to begin session 4, stream B of the Knowledge Share, which is a beginner's guide to QRP with Steve, Golf 0, Foxtrot United Whiskey. And Steve is now sharing his screen. And I'm going to go ahead and mute Dom. Steve, are you able to unmute your mic?
I thought I had.
Yes, I can hear you fine. Also in the chat, Anthony has posted some of the URLs for Dom's presentation, so if you want to cut and paste those, I'd recommend you go ahead and do that. So now we'll go ahead and turn it over to Steve. Steve, thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, John. And I was a bit surprised when we, why is that not advancing? There we go. I was a bit surprised when we did the survey that quite a number of people wanted a beginner's guide. I kind of assumed that because people were either a member of the QRP club or a member of a reflector or something like that, that they would know about QRP, but no harm in refreshing people's things, and hopefully I can fill in a few gaps in your knowledge or understanding, and help you to become, what's the phrase, devoted to low power communication. So where to start? That's the sort of thing I thought would be useful, and I have borrowed a lot of the information from this very fine book called QRP Basics, which if you're going to start, that's probably a good place to start. Written by our founder, George Dobbs, and it's getting a little bit long in the tooth now, but it's still a good book, and it covers most of the things you would want to know when you're getting started with QRP. It's an RSGB book, it's not a QRP club book, but if you do buy copies, the club does get royalties. So end of commercial, and we'll move on. So the first thing is, what is QRP? And it's amazing the number of times I see incorrect answers to that question. I guess it means different things to different people. If you're used to running kilowatt amplifiers, QRP can be sort of 100 watts, I guess. But these are the internationally agreed levels for CW and data, I should stress, and for SSB. And the more extreme QRPers, they crank it right back to less than 1 watt. And we use the designation QRPP to designate that that's a milliwatt contact. And I was very skeptical about such things, but having made contact at that power level, I know it is feasible. The origins obviously go back to the Q code, and QRP used to mean, can you reduce your power? As the amateur radio service developed and more people got on the air, QRP actually became a way of operating. And it's good operating practice because the mantra is that you use the minimum amount of power required for the contact, and the number of times you hear people saying, you're 5 and 9 plus 60 dB, well, quite clearly you're running a little bit more power than you need to if that's the case. So it helps everybody else if the bands are less crowded and there's less power being used. So yeah, it's good operating practice, and those are the sort of power levels that we're looking at. A complete aside, the power meter you can see is one that I made, supplied by Kanga Products. They're not currently stocking them, but it is a fantastic bit of test equipment. If you get some back on the market, I would strongly advise as a good example. It's really good build and very, very accurate. So again, end of the commercial there. So why would you go QRP? I teach amateur radio in the UK, and I've never ceased to be amazed at the number of people that we take through the training. They get qualified to use 400 watts and then immediately join the QRP club. I hope that's my influence, but it's amazing the number of people that do that. There is no one answer to that question, why would you go QRP? And I've got some of them on the slide here. My personal one was the cost. I came into amateur radio with a young family and a mortgage that felt like I was repaying half the national debt. And the chances of buying a commercial rig just was not there. It's just not going to happen. So I was forced, if you like, to build some gear, and the first thing I built was a QRP rig, and I've been hooked ever since. And so that was my thing. Homebrew isn't always cheap, but it's a way to go. Portability is another one that a lot of people like to, why they like QRP, and the cartoon, which comes from Sprat there, is a good example of how low power, lightweight equipment can come into its own in some extreme circumstances. You don't find many summits on the air operators lugging 400 watt linears and the relevant power supplies up mountains. So QRP portable is certainly a very good thing, and rigs like the Mountain Topper and that, you can stick in your pocket, and it's great fun to be able to do that. With less RF field comes less EMC risk, and that I think Graham mentioned earlier that he lived in an area with weak television reception, and anything more than a couple of watts would wipe out the neighbourhood's TV reception. So that's a consideration. Touch wood, I've never had much of a problem with EMC, except on my own TV, believe it or not, with about 3 watts of CW. I was causing interference, but nothing that a couple of ferrite rings couldn't sort out. But the risk is certainly much lower than if you're running very high power. But I think the biggest draw for QRP is the challenge, and it can be a challenge. But I think that's it's a bit like the fly fishing. You could go out with a trawler and scoop up all the fish in the ocean very easily, or you can go down to a river with a rod and a fly and use some skill and some operating practices to get the fish of your dreams. So that there's an element of skill and planning and all those sort of things that I think helps with QRP, or makes it attractive. So what can be achieved? And a lot of people say, is there any point using low power? Well, yes, I think there is. I wouldn't be the chairman of the QRP club if I didn't think that, would I? But let's manage expectations. You are not going to plug in a 2 watt, 2 transistor radio into a bit of wire and work the world, particularly at the moment while the propagation isn't too helpful. Give it another 4 or 5 years and that might be the case. But you do need to plan and think about what you're doing and where you're doing it. And if you saw Steve Nichols' talk, you'd have got a flavour of some of that. Knowing what's going to be available, which band to be on, can make a heck of a difference in your QSO count. But it is possible. As I say, I've made contacts down into milliwatts. I've made contacts with 400 watts as well. But I think the ones that stick with me most are those that are at the low power end. You've probably seen this chart before, which compares signal strengths and power. And I've deliberately started at S9 plus 6 dB because it makes it easy to work out the 6 dB reduction per S point. But let's assume you're having a QSO with 400 watts and your report is S9 plus 6 dB. If you halve the power and halve again down to 100 watts, you'll drop down to S9. And then if you halve it and halve again down to 25 watts, you're at S8. Half and half again, 6 watts, we're getting into QRP zone here, S7. Half and half again, 1.5 watts, which is sort of typical from a 2 transistor, 3 transistor CW rig maybe, S6. And even down to 750 milliwatts, you're still at S5, which is not a bad signal. Unless, of course, and I think, again, there was some discussion earlier, if the noise level is at S6 or 7, or even S9, that's when the QRP signals don't get heard. It's entirely possible that you could be radiating a perfectly good signal, the propagation's getting you into the zone, but the guys at the other end can't hear you because of the noise levels. So you have to be mindful of that as well. And I've certainly noticed if I go and operate from a rural environment, the noise level is just unbelievable. I was once in France and I was convinced that my radio was broken because there was no background noise until the signal appeared, and it was amazing, the difference. So being in the best location for noise is as good as being somewhere with a huge antenna. Okay, what about my experience? And if you do get involved with QRP, it won't be long before you get this sort of mantra trotted out. Oh, life's too short for QRP. Well, my experience is it's not. And I kind of turn that around and say, actually, I think life's too long for QRO. And I think that might be the sort of nub of these people who they get qualified, they do the high power thing. And after a few weeks, they've worked the world and they go, well, what next? And the challenge of QRP then becomes very relevant. So I've just pulled a QSL card out of my collection and put that on the screen there just to prove this. This contact was made with a Homebrew SSB transceiver. Some of you may have heard it, the BITX or BitX. It was running 3 watts output at the time. It was spread across the bench like a complete rat's nest. And I was listening, and this guy was talking, and he said, I wonder if there's any QRP stations listening that might want to give us a call. And I gave him a call with no expectations of a reply, but we had a good chat for about 20 minutes or so. And you can see the signal report there. He was giving me an S9. He was bouncing the signal off my table. He was that loud, but and he was very proud to point out that it was obviously his tower and beam that was doing all the heavy lifting. Probably true, but we made the contact and thoroughly enjoyed it. So thanks to Dave for that. The QSL code came direct, by the way, a few days later, so I didn't have to wait very long at all. You might be wondering why there's a reference there to the RSGB Hope QSO party. For those who are not familiar, during lockdown, the Radio Society of Great Britain organised the QSO party. And basically there was a 90-minute session every day for about 6 weeks, and each day had a different mode and a different time of day. So the QRP club, we managed to get a team of people to operate each day, and somebody did the CW, somebody else did the FT8, somebody else did the SSB, and so on. And we had a great time. And I'll just check my results here. There were over 500 entries into that QSO party from all over the world. A lot of them were UK, but a lot of them were overseas as well. And of the 500 entries, the 3 of the top 10 were QRP stations. So in amongst all the 400 watt linears and the amplifiers and all the rest of it, the 3 QRP stations managed to get in there and show that the power wasn't everything. It was about being in the right place at the right time, using your skills, using your operating practices to make those contacts. And I have to thank the guys who operated the club call sign along with me to do well. Ironically, the QRP club didn't do as well as some of the QRPers, but we had fun doing it, and that's the main thing. It would be remiss of me to do a talk about what can be achieved without mentioning George. GM3OXX, sadly no longer with us, but George, before he died, had worked over 300 countries with QRP, all of them with homebrew rigs, and all of them with 1 watt or less. And on the slide there is his OXO transmitter, which many people have built, myself included. Works every time, and that's the sort of thing that George used. And he certainly showed that you could achieve a lot with not very much. And his antennas were all wire antennas as well, nothing major there. More recently, Carl, G0FUW, he was the winner of our club Chelmsley Trophy, which is an award for the best log of the year. So throughout 2019, Carl worked over 1,400 stations. Well, they made 1,400 QSOs in 71 different countries, and they were split between CW and SSB. And of those, 119 were 2-way QRP contacts. Now, bearing in mind that I think we heard in Steve Nichols' talk that 2019 was down as the sunspot minima, I shudder to think what Carl's going to achieve when the sunspots start cooperating. But well done to Carl. He's out there, he's on the air, and he knows where to go hunting. So it just shows what can be achieved if you're in the right place at the right time. So how do you do QRP? We've looked at the hows, the whys, and all the rest of it. How do we do it? Well, the first one's dead easy. You turn the power down. Most modern radios have got a menu of some description where you can turn down the RF power setting. The one there is a Yaesu FT897, I think it is. It's a 100 watt rig, but you can go in there, crank it back to 5 watts, and it suddenly becomes a QRP radio. most radios can do that. The older ones, you had to rig up some sort of ALC thing at the back, which wasn't very convenient, but it could be done. But the modern ones, it's fairly trivial. Some of them will only go down to 10 watts, which is fine for the SSB QRP. But if you're desperate to do CW, you're gonna have to work out some way of getting it down that extra 5 watts. I'm going to cover the other ones, the binary radio and building a radio in a moment. But the important thing is you've got to get on the air. Whatever radio you've got, whatever antenna you've got to get on the air and sit in moaning about the propagation not being very good is no good. You've got to get out there and do it. And that QSO party that we took part in really brought home to me how things can change on a daily basis. There were some days I would go on, I could hear all sorts of stations. The next day, nothing, it was just noise. So being on there, spending time on the air, that's how you make the contacts. And it's amazing what suddenly pops out of the woodwork when you least expect it. And, you know, here in Japan or something like that, when you're expecting Scotland is quite something. But you've got to be on the air to do it. And what's that phrase? That the more I get on the air, the luckier I get. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. So if you want to buy a radio, I have to say, as I do my training work, a lot of the newcomers now, they qualify straight down to the radio shop with a credit card and they buy themselves a radio. No problem with that. There's some very good radios out there. Some of them are on the screen now. But they come at a price, and various prices that they are too. I have a Yaesu 817. I've had it for about 20 years or something like that now. It's getting long in the tooth. The 818 now has replaced it. To all intents and purposes, it's the same radio. It's just got a little bit more power and I think a little bit more sustainable in terms of the devices they've used. But you're looking at, I don't know, in UK money, £600. I guess it's about the same in dollars in the US. So it's a significant investment, but you've got the shack in a box there, and you probably wouldn't need any more radios for a very long time. The Ellicraft, the next one going clockwise, the KX3, again, fantastic radio, brilliant performance, got the software-defined radio sort of architecture, brilliant filtering, a bit more power, built-in batteries, yada, 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 but a tag of about £1,300 or dollars without all the toys. So again, a significant investment if you're going to go down that route. Directly below that is the sort of new kid on the block. There's is it the Xiegu G90 from China. It's actually, I think this is the radio that Carl has used a lot for his contacts to get the trophy. Very good reports on it. I haven't seen one, I haven't used one myself. About £500. That gives you, I think, multi-band, all modes, again, SDR architecture, which is the way most things are going. And then the final one, the definite new kid on the block, is the new ICOM IC703. Again, hearing lots of good things about it. Not actually seen one in the flesh yet, but again, you're looking at £1,300 plus all the toys, the special carry bag, and all the things that go with it. But I can imagine if it's following on from the 7300 and the like, it's going to be an impressive radio for sure. So yeah, if you want to buy something, there's QRP rigs out there, way more than there were when I came into the hobby, that's for sure. And the quality, whether some people say one make, some say another, they're all pretty good these days. That you don't get to sell rubbish radios these days. There are of course lots of second-hand gear on the market. You can still buy the Heath kits and the Tentex and all these sort of things. Even the old Kenwood TS 130, was it? The QRP radios, they're still around, and if you buy them from a reputable dealer or a ham who will let you try them, then that's a less expensive way into the commercial side of QRP. Homebrew is always an option, and as a homebrew myself, I would always champion this as a way into the hobby. Top right there, we've got a scratch build Warner, which was in a couple of sprats ago. There's 4 transistors on there, a few capacitors and coils, and that produces about 2 or 3 watts on 5 megs, I think that one is. That with a commercial receiver, and you are in QRP station. No need for anything too fancy. And the guy at the other end will not know whether you're transmitting from an ICOM, a Yaesu, or a scratch build bit of PCB that you've knocked up yourself. It is very basic. It's crystal controlled, so it's stuck on one frequency. You know, it has its limitations, but as George, as Record showed, it shouldn't hold you back too much. Below that, the kit in bits there is what I say it's a kit. It's kind of a half-built radio that you buy. The BITX or the micro BITX. This one, I think version 6. Multi-band operation, DDS control. You can see the crystal filter in there. You know, fantastic bit of engineering, all with the box and all the rest of it. And I think that comes in at about £200. So one of our students last year built one of these, and he absolutely loves it. He's been working the world with it, thinks it's fantastic, and you know, why would you buy anything else? Was his view. And put together in India. Ashar's got the team in India. They're working hard, and it's providing local employment, which is fantastic. And it's not all about CWSSB traditional sort of build. The one in the centre of the slide there is from Kanga Products. It's one of their SDR receivers, and this is the Fillingly, is it? Findingly, I forget the name. But that one works on 80 meters. If you want to try SDR without shelling out a load of money, but try out surface mount construction, that's a little kit you can do. And I have to say it works very well. I'm thinking of turning mine into an IF and putting a hardware front end on it and using that as an IF, which is something that interests me to have a go at. So, yep. You've got to look at these things. Do I want a kit with all the bits? Do I going to do it myself? Gather all the parts together? Am I going to use valves? I haven't got any valve pictures there, but many people do still use valves. Am I going to go CW, SSB? Am I going to use hardware? Am I going to use software? Lots of considerations, but Homebrew is most definitely a possibility. And if you stick around for the next session, Pete Giuliano is going to take you through building an SSB transceiver and hopefully show you it's not too difficult. Does good operating skills help? Well, yes, it does. I hinted at this already. Listen, and listen again has been my motto. There's absolutely no point going on the band and calling CQ if the propagation's not there. So have a listen, see what's going on. Use the sort of tools that Steve Nichols was talking about to check if propagation's happening. Have a look at the DX spots to see if people are working other stations, things like the reporter software, websites and things like that. And don't just sort of randomly tune up the band and start calling CQ, because you may be wasting time. If you use the centers of activity, and there are those for CW and SSB, and then start calling, you're more likely to bump into like-minded people who are listening for QRP stations and are very happy to work through. Tail ending is something that I got into a lot when I first came into the hobby. I was nervous about calling CQ, but if you listen to a QSO in progress, find it somebody, particularly if it's CW and it's a speed you can read, wait till they send their 73s and then call one of the stations. And you already know they're on the right frequency, they're listening, and more often than not, they'll give you a QSO. And I've been very successful with that as a technique in terms of picking up where people leave off. Now, I know contests are a bit of a love or hate it sort of topic, but in terms of using contests to test out your equipment, to hone your operating skills, to find out where your signals are going, they're pretty good. The guy at the other end is probably listening very hard to get the points. So your QRP signal suddenly gains a few dBs of gain, and you can suddenly be heard when perhaps previously they may not have strained their ears to pull you out the noise. And again, I've had some success with that, work in countries that I wouldn't have worked or hadn't worked previously. So it can be a bit cut and thrust, but if you pick your moments, particularly late in the contest when people are desperate for a few more contacts, it's a good way of getting in there and making the contacts. As I say, contests can be very divisive. Not everybody enjoys them, but there are awards which you can chase. You can set yourself a challenge, and then you're just up against the propagation and the rest of the world. Really, not in a competitive way, but something that you can achieve. In the UK, every foundation license holder is limited to 10 watts, so they're by default QRP, certainly SSB operators, and the RSGB have a foundation award, which you work a number of stations on 4 bands, and there are bronze, silver and gold. So a very nice way of getting into the hobby when you've got the first license, something to aim for, gets you going. The ARRL's DXCC program, very well known across the world and much respected, and 100 countries with QRP is no mean feat. So anybody that achieves that certainly deserves some recognition. In the QRP Club, we've got a number of awards for various things. The first one is to work other members. If you work 20 of our members, you can get a certificate for that. And then you can add on increments, I think it's of 10. If you work 25 countries, you can get a certificate with QRP. And similarly, if you make 10 two-way QRP contacts, you can get a certificate. And all of those have got enhancements for sort of increments beyond the basic. The big one is the QRP Master, and there are, in the 40-odd year history of the club, we've only got 154, I think it is, of those. And for that, you need to work 60 members, 75 countries, and make 20 two-way QRP contacts. Somebody said to me, well, that's easy with FT8. Nobody's done it yet. So all the ones that have been through traditional means, but I don't see any reason why it shouldn't be done with digital modes, maybe with a stamp or an enhancement or an endorsement to say that it's a Digimode master certificate. And the one that's on the screen, and the last one on my list, is the 1,000 miles per watt, which the QRP ARCI issue. That one was mine. Another contact into the States, 1,056 miles with 3 watts gave me the, no, it couldn't be that, sorry. It must have been 3,000 odd miles to give the 1,056 miles per watt, just over the threshold. And it was a CW contact. I thought it was an SSB one, but obviously a CW contact. And yeah, a great achievement to get the certificate, and very happy to have that here in the shack. And I guess you could do them on different bands, on different modes. So that's my presentation about a beginner's guide to QRP. I've given you an idea of what's involved, how you can do it, what you can achieve, some targets you can set yourself, and hopefully you're not limited to the cartoon there, where people work across town and think they've done pretty well, or in that case, into the next door neighbour, which is definitely not the limit of QRP, that's for sure. So with that, happy to open it up to any questions.
Thank you, Steve. We do have some questions that are in the chat. First, a comment from Dom M1KTA on the QRP Basics book that you mentioned. There is a second edition of that out, which would be the more recent one. So we have a question from Mike, KC3PIV, and it says, for the new ham interested in QRP and homebrew, is it better to start with a higher power factory HF rig to learn the ropes, or just to jump in with a QRP kit?
I don't think one's better than the other. I think if you've got a high power rig, then yeah, crank the power back and give it a go. That's an easy, quick way to get into it and see what happens. You might even start the contact with the high power and gradually reduce the power and see if the other guy actually notices, because I've done that myself. It's amazing how low you can go before there's a comment, oh, you've got a little bit quiet, So I don't think there's a better way, one or the other. My personal route was in through Homebrew, as I say, purely because I couldn't afford any commercial gear at the time. So I think it's one of those, depends on your situation and what feels good for you. There's no right and wrong way, that's for sure.
Our second question comes from John, G0FUW. How do you beat S7 to S9 noise from a housing estate?
I wish I knew the answer to that, because that's exactly the position I'm in. However, I've been doing some experiments lately with receive antennas separate to transmitting antennas. And I've had some success with something that's going to be spoken about later, the terminated tilted folded dipole. I tried one of those and found that where previously I couldn't make contact at all on 80 meters, I could with the T2FD. Yeah, the signal strengths are down, but the noise is way down. So that actually allowed me to make contacts which previously I just could not have made. I've been doing some experiments with amplified loops, and again, I'm hearing things on there that previously I couldn't hear. But quite frankly, the noise is out there, and I submitted a complaint to Ofcom. They investigated it as sort of they do and said, tough, basically, that's modern life. So the other option, of course, is to go portable and just put the gear in a rucksack, head for the hills, and get out of town. That way, you'll get down the noise level is a lot less.
Our next question is from Rob M0NIL. And what's the best way to learn Morse in 2020?
One of the many computer programs. I mean, there are so many out there. I've done Morse classes here in Bath. We use the Koch method, where you learn one letter or two or three letters, and then as you get proficient with those, you add more in. But you learn at a sort of a decent speed from the start, rather than trying to learn it slow and then get faster, which was how I was taught it. I find it's much easier to start at a good speed and then just add a few more in. G0FUW has a great program. There's a brilliant download called Just Learn Morse, which we've used in class. The teacher can put different text in, so you don't know what you're expecting. You know, we put some humorous stuff in there that made people giggle when they decoded it. Make it fun. That's the best way to do it.
John G0UBE had a follow-up question. How do you get a signal into the UK? Specifically, he had some trouble working anyone in the RSGB Hope.
Well, again, all I can say is I use the tilted T2FD, I'll call it, and I was working into G. Now, some days I could work very well, some days I couldn't work at all. But I did work other stations with SSB, CW, and FT8 or FT4 using that dipole, all with sort of QRP powers. I've also done some experiments which you'll read a little bit about in the next sprat, using an end-fed half-wave for 40 meters and a 49-to-1 transformer. I worked Colin, who was using the club call sign, as it turned out, G5LOW over in the southeast. I was playing around with the antenna, heard Colin, gave him a call, and we had a QSO. So it is possible, but you need to have a look at the antennas and see what works for you.
We have several comments in the chat that are recommending some possible Morse code applications. You can check that out there. Are there any other questions for Steve? Steve, during your presentation, you mentioned that you really liked, or some of the most memorable events were QRPP contacts that you made. Are there any that stick out more than most?
Oleg, our friend and member over in Russia, ran an event for a couple of years. I don't know if he's done it this year, or I haven't seen anything, which was a winter event. And the idea was that there was like a little algorithm that you could work stations, and the lower your power was and the lower their power was, the more points you gained. And I was running 500 milliwatts for a while, and just working stations around Europe with that was absolutely amazing, that you could actually make those contacts. And getting into Asiatic Russia with 500 milliwatts on 20 meters was absolutely fantastic, really, really good. The very first contact I ever made on CW was with milliwatt, but I have to confess it was only about 20 miles on 80 meters. But it's memorable because it was the first one, I guess. And but I do remember being there in buckets of sweat when the guy actually returned my call. It was a nerve-wracking moment. But probably, I think my most memorable QRP contact wasn't QRPP, but it was with just 3 watts. And I was in France at the time on holiday, and I'd been working loads of German stations, and no offense to any German attendees, but another station called, and I went, oh, not another DL, you know, but I'll call him anyway. And he came back and said, no, not DL, ZL. And that was 3 watts into New Zealand. And I thought somebody was, you know, winding me up, and it was actually somebody else. But again, the QSL card came through, ZL3PW, I think his call sign was, Paul. I've got the QSL card. It's one of my treasured possessions. You know, to do that with a wire dipole, and people say QRP is a waste of time, I just wave that at them.
I think we have time for one more question, and that's going to come from Les, GI1BZT, obviously a builder, because he's asking, what is the risk of getting addicted to Altoid mints?
Well, you can always empty the tins and sell the mints on. You know, there's probably a black market for mints not in tins, but yeah, probably a high risk, I think.
Okay, I don't see any other questions for Steve, and we're very close to time for shutting down the session. So, Steve, any final comments before we break?
No, not really, other than to say thank you, everybody, for turning up. I hope it's been informative, and if you do have any questions, by all means, email me, get in contact through Sprat, and we will endeavour to do some more for beginners, because I think it's great that more people are interested in QRP.
Steve, thank you very much for your presentation. Very informative, excellent job, and we really appreciate that.
Thank you.
I'd also like to thank my co-host for this session, who is Mark K5MGJ. So we have, I think, what's going to be a fabulous session coming up next in the main webinar, which is Homebrew SSB transceivers. So I will go ahead and conclude the session. Thank you all so very, very much for attending. We're up to right around 119 participants for this session. Have a great day and enjoy the rest of the conference.